Thanks so much, Katie, and thank you to all the folks at EasyBib who have worked in partnership with us to bring you this webinar and to host it. And thank you very much for everything you do and for bringing your tools to schools for free and making it available to them and then giving them the support they need to really make it work in their classrooms. So thank you to EasyBib. I'd like to get started with something that I think we all know and that brings us together, but sometimes the statistics are a little startling about the writing problem in our schools. We know that the solution is not easy, but yet we know that in order for kids to learn to write, they have to write, and they have to write often. They have to get feedback, and that feedback should be personal and individualized. And there's lots of research about that. Of all the statistics that I see when I look at these numbers, the scariest one really for me are the ones who they are in 8th and 12th grade students who can't write proficiently on the assessments that they're trying to take for getting into college. That means they already have persistence, they already have ambition, they already have goals related to going to college, but 73% of students who take the ACT are not prepared for college English composition by the time they graduate high school. And that means they're going to remedial classes, and the statistics there are scary, et cetera, et cetera. So I'd like to focus on that as kind of our mental model of the type of students we're looking to help the most right away, and then how can the ways we help our best students also impact the way that we engage and increase the motivation for our students maybe who are not as engaged. So let's take a look at that if we could. Currently our model for responding to student writers tends to fall in the pattern of assign, grade, repeat. So here's a sample paper, and teachers will recognize that stack in the upper right in the image because this is what they face all the time. So let's say, for instance, I'm finishing my unit on Lord of the Flies. We're going to do an essay on Piggy's death, and then I'm going to collect those essays. Meanwhile, we're going to move on to Romeo and Juliet. Whoops, I have this whole stack of papers to grade, and now really I'm not really focusing necessarily on improving their writing. I'm really focusing in on understanding their performance to give them a grade. And by the time we get done with this stack, I'll be moving on to the next one. And so the feedback that we give students tends to get captured in this research that was done by Spiller, and we kind of bulletized the list and divided it into what students say and what teachers say. And we've all been in the position of giving a paper back, watching students flip to the last page, they look at their grade, and they decide, well, should I read the comments or not? If the grade matches the expectations, typically they won't even read the end comment. If it's below their expectations, they might read the end comment, or if it's above their expectations, they might read the end comment. And when you really talk about all that feedback in the margins, etc., what prompts students to look at that feedback? Well, unfortunately, it's when their grade is either substantially lower than what they expected, or there is some other factor involved that forces them to. For instance, they're meeting with another teacher, they're meeting with a writing tutor, whatever it might be, that's when they will go back to those individual comments and the analytical feedback. Unfortunately, that's not good enough. Teachers spend an incredible amount of time providing all that feedback, and ideally it would impact student writing. So when I look at this list, there are a few things on here that really stand out. One is they don't know what to do with the feedback. They don't understand the purpose of it. The other one on here that has been an area of concern of mine in my research has been around the feedback's too late to be helpful for anything. We have heard from students about, gee, if I knew what the feedback was going to be about, I might have been able to focus on those areas when I was doing the writing. Of course, teachers say a different story, and one just as frustrating to them. They don't think students are reading the feedback, that they're only interested in the grade. They don't know how much feedback to write, and they spend a lot of time doing it, and they don't feel like it's got enough value. So we're going to talk a little bit about, in the course of this webinar, about how we might change that dynamic. How do we change this cycle and improve the situation for both? So in our research, what we've done is really focus in on looking at what master writing teachers do. And they get the same pile that the less successful writing teachers do. They still have to slug away at it. When they get them done, they're just as eager to get them back to students. There are a lot of questions about, do they analyze the pile for common errors? Do they do statistical analysis on that pile so they know what the gaps are for their individual group of students and what they can do about it? But we also know that the best writing teachers are not only in ELA. There are some wonderful writing teachers in the social studies department, in the science department, and even in the fine arts department who make it a priority to have students write consistently and often. So the things that we looked at did cut across the curriculum areas. And here's what we noticed. We noticed that the master writing teachers close the gap between the feedback that they give and the feedback that students use. And while that sounds like an easy concept and sounds like something people should aspire to, these teachers seem to be very deliberate about it. And they also seem to make it a priority that if they are going to give feedback, they are going to have expectations about how it's used by their students. And to get there, and this was articulated by NCTE, the National Council of the Teachers of English, about their beliefs about the teaching of writing, and the way they phrase it, I think kind of gets to the heart of it, which is that you have to believe that everyone has the capacity to write, that writing can be taught, and that teachers can help students become better writers. And really believe that. The same way an art teacher has to believe that they can help a kid be a better artist, that they can help them improve their drawing, the way a music teacher believes that they can improve the way their violin students play the violin, that it's not just a natural gift. That underpins everything that they do. And so their feedback and the research that we've been reading about that feedback certainly talks about the key elements of believing that you can teach writing and what would you do if you believed you could. So there have been other people in the field, Grant Wiggins and the UBD group certainly have a lot to say about feedback. And they talk about the 7 essentials. Robert Marzano, the research scientist who wrote The Art and Science of Teaching and many other books, talks about the goals for students. And for them, both Wiggins and Marzano, they also look at it from the student perspective and the idea of it being user-friendly in Wiggins' world, but it's also, in Marzano's world, a focus on students identifying what it is that they need help with. So this appears in John Hattie's John Hattie's research as well. So John Hattie's famous for publishing the book Visible Learning and the subsequent book Visible Learning for Teachers. So in Hattie's research, he was looking at the key factors that actually work in schools, things that make a difference. And one of the things that he found to be most critical and most effective in schools is feedback. And in his world, he too distinguishes between students and teacher feedback. That is, teachers giving feedback to students, and also a model where students can give feedback to teachers. And of the two, the most effective form of feedback that he found in all of the research was students giving feedback to teachers. And that's an amazing concept because oftentimes we focus in on the feedback we're giving kids and the pressure to make that meaningful, where really it needs to be a part of a feedback system that allows students to give feedback to teachers about what they need. And so specifically, the answers fall into 3 areas. Where am I going? Their goals. How am I going? Like, what am I going to do? And where to next? That is, what can I work on? So because a lot of his research combines a very technical, research-based and analytical approach, he's also worked to combine that with things that teachers can do and put it into language that teachers can actualize. So here in these 4 areas, he really talks about where that fits into your classroom. And I'd highly recommend the book Visible Learning. There's no way I can do it justice in this webinar. But I will focus in on one key area of his research. And that is, he talks about the distinguishing instructional feedback versus corrective feedback. Let me define those two terms. When we do corrective feedback, we're saying to a student, I know what is expected, and I'm going to correct you to bring you up to that level. And the other model, instructional level, says, I hear where you are at, I know what comes next, and I'm going to teach those things to you. So when we look at student writing, are we focusing in on instruction? That is, here are the things you can do to improve, or here are the things I saw when reading your paper that you did wrong. In one model, instructional feedback, you're really a teacher, and in corrective feedback, you really end up playing the role of editor, somebody who is helping students fix the things they did wrong. And there's a value to that, but it's an editorial value. It's a corrective value. It's not an instructional one. So when we look at the cycle of how we teach writing in schools, this graphic hopefully captures some of it. Writing is a process, but the feedback loop is critical, and it needs to be personalized for each student. We do acknowledge that the assessment of writing involves complex, informed human judgment, and for ELL students, that might mean communicating sometimes in their native language. For special education students, this means communicating and scaffolding learning to meet their individual needs. They choose continuous coaching over the model of one paper and then feedback, assign and grade. So when we look at this, and we look at this, over there on the left where, teachers start by providing a formative writing assignment, and then they collect all this writing, they somehow find a way to effectively manage that big pile. You'll see a silver star on reading and providing meaningful feedback to each student, and maybe that's on the paper. They efficiently get the feedback back to students. And then, and maybe this is where the gold star is they coach students on how to improve writing. And maybe that's through writing conferences if they have time. But the truth is, at the middle school and high school levels, and even into early college, that time just isn't there for teachers to meet with students when they are carrying a student load of 120 students or more sometimes. So we started looking around at sort of what are the ways that teachers are responding to student writers efficiently with collecting papers. We found some funny examples, and you'll notice the colored ones over there on the right, the really doodled up one in the middle. But the book covers that are highlighted here, I would also highly recommend for you if you are looking to follow up on the content of this webinar and really read the detailed research about it. Dr. Nancy Somers, who teaches at Harvard, is a wonderful professor and teaches in this area. And then there's Tracy Gardner, who wrote Designing Writing Assignments, I think as part of NCTE's mission to help teachers respond to feedback. To respond to student writers giving effective feedback. So here are some of the things we know. We know that feedback needs to be given in a reasonable amount of time, but certainly not when the next writing is assigned or after already the next writing is assigned. We know that not everything needs feedback. We know that references to models makes a significant difference. So if you've provided model essays for students to read, those are great things to include in your feedback. For instance, we say things like, remember in the sample paper when, or the topic sentence of the first paragraph of the sample essay did this. What did yours seek to do? And we know that when we refer to the model papers, we are reinforcing the value of providing models for student learning. We also know that a critical time for improving the quality of the feedback is actually when you assign writing, is to plan that you're going to give this feedback. You're going to figure out what is the student's responsibility and what is yours. You're going to help them practice the metacognitive habits necessary for developing as writers and thinkers. And that's part of student responsibility. Things to prepare students to write well are questions such as, what do you want your readers to know or think about when they're done reading your writing? And to have students answer those kinds of questions before they sit down to write. And that's that focus on audience sensitivity, this idea that when the we are sensitive to our audience, we actually spend more time and give greater care to the writing that we produce. And if we can communicate that to students, and this is what master writing teachers do, they really do focus their assignments with a purpose towards that. The sensitivity to the reader and what they want their readers to know when they are done reading their writing. I'm going to take a little pause there and check in with Katie to see how we're doing. If any of you have comments or questions, please pass them along. It's good to mix it up from time to time with the feedback from our audience. So Katie, should we keep moving or?
No questions so far, Doug. Looks good here.
Okay, great. So now we've collected this stack of papers and we decide we need to give feedback, and that's what we do as teachers. So we call this the moment of decision. And the first thing that the research talks about is the importance of focusing in on the student reflection. That when they hand it in their writing, they should reflect on their goals and their purpose. Did they accomplish them? And this is where the teacher plays the critical role. If they haven't, what is the next step for them to achieving that? We don't want to articulate all of the steps. Rather, the best writing teachers focus in on what would be the next step for this writer. Expert teachers understand that they're responding to writers, that they don't just assign writing to grade writing. So when they're reading student writing, they're not just reading the paper and responding to the paper. They're thinking about that student in their mind and writing towards that student. So some of the recommendations that the research talks about is this. Start by sitting on your hands. Read the paper over to get an overview of the paper's directions, strengths, and main problems. Then decide, what are the 2 or 3 most important things you want to convey to this student writer? In other words, set a priority and not try to comment on everything. Pick your focus. Because commenting on everything at once overloads you and it overloads the students. And that's what slows you down. It's because you're trying to read for everything and try to give feedback on everything. We sometimes give not enough feedback on the things that is the next thing that's going to help that writer. We don't give enough feedback to that. Or the feedback that we do focus, that area of focus we do want students to have, they don't get to see it enough because it gets clouded by all of the other things that we gave feedback on. And the fourth key to this is really the master writing teachers are starting now to leverage technology. And I don't mean doing the same thing that we did in writing comments in the margins and just using tools that simulate that. Like this screenshot, and it's blurred out deliberately, focus, you can see the problem with it. It's the same over...
Hold on a second. I'm sorry to interrupt you. It seems like a good number of people are having some trouble with audio issues right now. So if you could hold on for just a second.
Sure.
And Jeff, if you have any ideas as to what might be going on with the audio, that'd be great too. Thank you very much.
While we're pausing here to address some of our audio concerns, I will take a pause here and grab a quick drink of water. This is also a good time. You can enter in the chat box as well any questions or comments. And so when we return from the audio issues, we'll pick right up with those as well.
Okay, great. Thank you so much.
Yeah. I'm working on it on my end here as well, trying to see what's going on.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and I would distinguish the different kinds of rubrics that we encounter in our work. We focus in on 2 kinds. One is analytical rubrics. That is the idea that you might have 3 or 4 things or up to 6 things that you're giving feedback to the students, that those are your priorities. and you're, in a sense, analyzing the paper for those 6 things, or 3 things. Then there's the holistic rubric, which is really has 2 purposes, progress monitoring or curriculum monitoring. So for instance, when I use a broad writing rubric, and I think Ruth Cullum and the 6+1 traits are one example of those, the SAT group and the College Board publish a writing rubric, as does ACT. Those kind of broad holistic rubrics are good for progress monitoring. So I might use one of those rubrics to give holistic feedback after reading a whole paper, but nowhere in that rubric can I go back as a student and understand why I got a 4. I then as a student have to go and do the analysis of my paper. And that's where holistic rubrics don't really help a student improve their writing, but they do help a student monitor their progress. As well, we oftentimes use them in our curriculum on like benchmark assessments or end of quarter assessments to monitor the effectiveness of our curriculum. Are we touching all of the areas? Do we find that there's there's lots of improvement in organization and mechanics, but not enough in information or content? Okay, so it can give us feedback about our curriculum as well. But the key thing, one book that I thought was really powerful about rubrics discussed teaching the rubric prior to assigning the writing. That really spending a little more time before students write on your expectations with the rubric actually makes the using of the rubric a much more efficient and effective tool afterwards when you've got the stack of papers. So Katie, should we continue on with the webinar?
Yeah, we're all set, Doug. Everything looks good. We figured out what the issue is and everybody seems to have audio again.
Great. Terrific. So we left off here about picking your focus and commenting on everything at once overloads you and your students. There are some technology tools like WriterKey.com which can help you focus your feedback. But we also know that there are other tools that do the exact same thing we did in writing, but just use technology to do it. So when I look at this screen from Microsoft Office, I see a whole lot of comments. It's the same overload. For a student, it's very difficult to make sense of this. We know that the text marking with things like exclamation marks or check marks or squiggly lines or red lines don't really give students information. They might say great or nice job on something, but a student doesn't know nice job on what. And that can be just as confusing for a student as well. The things we do like are things like thumbs up where you can say nice job on something, or a comment box in which you really go into detail. We know that speech to text or speech where a student can listen to the audio right in the paper and you comment can be very helpful. And lastly, asking questions of the writer. Not always having the answer as you're a reader, but instead, I wonder why you use this example. I'm having difficulty, or I wonder why this evidence do you think supports that point? And creating a dialogue between the reader, you the teacher, and the student, the writer. Here are some other things we know that can make a young teacher look old very quickly. We know that the effective teachers ask questions. They respond as they read as a reader, not as an editor. And, they see themselves as a helpful teacher. And they don't see themselves as a curmudgeon, reading the student paper as somebody who's read the book 400 times and has read 4,000 essays about it before they got to yours. And so they consider, can I understand the feedback, and was it given with care? And, honestly, that can be a determining factor in becoming the masterful writing teacher, is the care with which you give the feedback. And a lot of that comes out in our summary comment. So, obviously it's nice to give an overview of the main things on which they need to work. They can distinguish the priorities for a student. And they focus in on the future. They don't just focus in on the paper at hand. It almost feels like a letter to them, to the students. And they start with positive and specific observations about the paper. And if the student has done a self-evaluation, they make sure to respond to it. Now on this slide, I'll be honest, I threw a ton of grammar stuff on here that you wouldn't be able to read. Why? Because essentially, teachers are unable to teach writing mechanics in the margin of a paper. It cannot be done. You cannot teach a comma splice in the margin of a paper. You can correct it, but you cannot change it. And so, our company, along with EasyBib, are working on technology tools to help teachers do these things better. We developed WriterKey as a tool for giving teachers effective and efficient tools to help them become more effective by becoming more efficient. So when students upload their writing into WriterKey, their teachers are able to focus their feedback in specific areas, and that all comments get supported with real content. So when we point something out about evidence choice, we don't just give them, the quick comment about it in the margin, but instead they should have access to a whole resource of content about how they can improve it. So when they go to revise their writing, they not only get the teacher comment, but they get supportive instruction. We also know that teachers, the best teachers, see it as a formative assessment system, and that they use the feedback they give to inform their instruction for the next piece of writing. And to do that, they need to collect data. And that's a lot of work. But technology tools like WriterKey can make that more efficient and can give you data views on your student writing quickly about what are the areas that they might improve on. And finally, we know that students will tend to focus more on their writing and put more effort in if they have the opportunity to engage with their teacher about writing. And maybe that's something where students aren't even able to see their grade prior to responding to teacher feedback. And so we've built those tools into WriterKey as well. To improve learner engagement is a key element of the master writing teacher. So we've been on the webinar for about 30 minutes, which is about, I know teachers' time is valuable. We do encourage you to ask questions and comment now and to start a dialogue about responding to student writers. Additionally, you can visit Write, Read, Respond and comment there, or you can visit writerkey.com where there are pilot sites and tools for teachers to learn more about responding to student writers efficiently and effectively. So I'm going to turn this back to Katie now to kind of guide us through the last portion of this webinar.
Hi, Doug. Thanks so much. Some really great information in there. Just a reminder, if you have any questions or comments, please put them in the chat box. While they're doing that, Doug, though, I actually had a quick question for you. So you had spoken earlier in the webinar about students giving feedback to teachers. Could you give a little more information about how students can give teachers feedback in this process and how they learn for that? Perhaps an example that you might have from a teacher that you worked with or yourself in your educational background of how that worked and how you set that up.
Yeah, no, that's a terrific question. Thank you for asking it. So in my teaching career, I preceded the technology piece of the last 4 or 5 years. So, this is going back, the mid-2000s here. So I commented on a lot of papers, and I wrote in the margins. And what I learned over time to do, which really improved my teaching, was to have students take that paper with my comments on it and respond to them, and ask the question, what in my feedback helps you? What is the feedback you understand? And what is the feedback you don't understand? And then I would collect the papers again. And here, I'll be honest with you, I would sit down and I'm not writing back to the students again. But what I am doing is trying to understand from my students what is the kind of feedback that's helpful. What is the feedback that I wrote that they understood? And it was then that I really understood that all those check marks I was making and those exclamation marks when I was excited, students made a great point, and I'd, be there with my marker on the side making exclamation marks because I was happy. And they were like, oh, so we had no idea that's what you meant. We just thought there was something we should do. And they wouldn't know. And so I think I became a lot better when I started to explain myself in a little more detail. And yeah, it took a little more time at that time because everything was handwritten, but my feedback became a lot more valuable, and I noticed that students were understanding my feedback much more. And that really led to a lot of what we have included in WriterKey. I also, as a teacher, grew very frustrated with students reading the grade and putting it in their backpack. And I started building a process, and then I've seen teachers do it better than when I did it, of dialoguing with the students. That is that then students write a note back to them and say, what about my feedback helps you or was not helpful to you? And they don't actually put the grades on the paper. And I never did that. I always put the grades on the paper, and I've learned this recently. Teachers who don't put the grades on the paper and force kids to respond to their feedback prior to them being able to see the grade have really noticed a student focus then on their feedback.
That's great insight, Doug. Thanks a lot. And then we also have another question from Kate. Do you favor having student writing portfolios where the development of a student's writing is gathered together?
I do. I'm the biggest fan in the world of writing portfolios. Unfortunately, I lived in the day, or taught in the day, of writing folders and writing cabinets full of writing folders that never got in the 10th grade teacher's hands. So the 9th grade teacher is diligent about having students build a writing portfolio, doing reflections on each paper about why they're including it in their portfolio, doing a broad reflection at the end of the year, or maybe halfway through the year and at the end of the year, on what they included in their portfolio and the growth they've seen to build the metacognitive skills for students to focus on their writing. But I always wanted that to go to the next year's teacher. But then the 10th grade teacher gets these 100 students, and then the stack of portfolios would be overwhelming. And so in the schools that I was in, truthfully, I don't think those portfolios got looked at enough. And PublishKey and WriterKey do have portfolio tools that do make that easy, and because they're connected to the data center, teachers do get a quick view. So I don't, it was with that experience that we built that portfolio tool. I think they're incredibly valuable, and I don't think storage places like Dropbox and Google Drive do enough because they don't encourage the reflection, and they don't encourage students choosing between multiple assignments and then putting them in a portfolio where they reflect on why they chose it. I think that's just too many layers for a teacher to manage in the storage box model that is out there, and they need a real tool that helps them do it well. And that's what we've tried to develop.
Okay, great, Doug. If anybody has any other questions or comments for Doug, please feel free to put them in the chat box. We'll just hang on here for another few minutes to see if there are any other questions from you all, and then we'll sign off.
Great, and as a follow-up, my email is on the screen now, and you are welcome to email me, if something occurs to you afterwards, or if you are listening to the recording of this webinar and want to ask follow-up questions. Please do not hesitate to email me or check out these websites for more information.
And yes, Kate, the recording will have the audio that you missed, although Doug did pause and then go back to where the audio cut out, so you hopefully shouldn't miss anything, but just in case, I was able to hear it through the phone. I was dialed in that way, and we didn't miss a thing, so that'll be all set for you all. Okay, great. I think that's everything from our audience here. Doug, thank you so much for your time today. I really enjoyed the webinar. It gave us a lot of things to think about. And we'll be sending out, as I said, the recording, the slide deck, as well as a certificate of completion for those of you who are attended today.
Thank you, Katie, and thank you for your patience with dealing with the audio as well.
Oh, thank you for your patience. It seems like we got it all settled, though, so which was great. And thanks, everybody, and have a wonderful afternoon.